Hey guys, so if you saw last week's video, I was talking about possibly having salt damage to my seedlings because of the compost that I brought in and filled my new raised beds with. Now, tests are still being conducted, and I'll have the results for you pretty soon, along with whatever remediation needs to happen to fix the issue. Now, a lot of you in that video questioned whether I might have had grazon damage. Now, grazon is a herbicide that farmers will spray their hay fields with to keep the weeds down, the broadleaf weeds. Doesn't kill the hay, just the weeds mixed in with it. So what happens with that hay is an animal, like a horse or a cow, eats the hay, and then the grazon passes through the body unaffected. They poop it out, it becomes manure, gets used in compost, and you'll have to excuse the chickens over here making noise. It gets used in the compost. You put the compost in your beds, and that grazon is still there, and it's a herbicide. So if you grow anything other than grasses and corn, like that's a grass, or hay, wheat, whatever, anything other than that, it's going to badly misshape it or kill it. Now, I have my doubts. It's not ruled out completely, but I don't think that that's what it is. I will go through all of this. I'll go through more on grazon when I have that video giving you the results. But all that to say, anytime you bring in compost from anywhere, you're not ever going to be 100% sure that it is not full of salt, grazon, or who knows what else. So I think it's really important for as many of us as possible to make our own compost. Now, at my last house, I had 3 compost beds, not too big, but for my size property, they were fine. And so I used my own compost. I did have to bring in some filling new beds and things, but I was able to top up with mostly my homemade compost. And composting is something that can be done no matter what size property you have, even if you have a patio garden. Now, I do not have yet a composting system set up here at the new house. That is a job that's on the list for this summer, so I can have it ready for all the fall harvest time and getting all that taken care of. However, I'm no expert when it comes to composting. And so I wanted to go directly to an expert. So I put out on our Facebook group a question or a post asking who had questions about compost. And so I took several of those questions and I sent them over to my friend Tony from Simplified Gardening on YouTube, who has a new book out today called Composting Masterclass. So I thought, who better to give us some tips on composting? So I took you guys' Facebook questions, sent him over some. So without further ado, from the UK, here's Tony.
Hi folks, I'm Tony O'Neill and Brian has asked me to answer a few questions you may have had on composting because he's put a question on one of his Facebook groups and you guys have been asking lots of questions. So I'm going to have my phone with me today because that's where I got the questions stored and I need it for your names as well. So the first question comes from Emily Johnson. What can I add to make the breakdown time shorter? So when you're making your compost, it's really important to get the ratios correct. So whether that's greens and browns. So what we have here is grass clippings and we have some old wood chip off my paths. And if you get this ratio wrong, then it could be, say for argument's sake, there's too much browns in there. Well, it's going to take an eternity to break down because there's not enough nitrogen. But likewise, if there's too much nitrogen, then that will heat up way too quick and turn into a smelly mess. So that doesn't break down. Compost activators are not required, so save your money on them. Get the greens and browns right. But here's the key tip. The moisture content is the number one thing you need to worry about, not greens or browns. So if you just get a good mix in your compost and keep that moisture content around about 60%, and I'll cover that a bit later on today, then your compost is going to heat up and it's going to break down really quickly. Question 2 comes from Brannon Johnson. So I don't know, Brannon, if you're any relation to Emily, but how can we speed up the process? My tumbler is a 50 gallon or 70 gallon, takes forever, maybe 6 months or longer. though what it does produce is great. What about accelerators? As I've already mentioned, we don't want to put accelerators in the compost. It's just a waste of money. It's not required. Compost is designed to break down. That's what it does. Without our input at all, it's organic matter breaking down. So what I would say to you is, in your 50 or 70 gallon rotating compost bin, I would look at the design of it, because they're not all created equal. In some bins, the mixture inside isn't mixed, so there's no paddles to break that compost up. So effectively what it does is slides around the bottom as you're turning it. You need some big paddles in it that are going to break up and aerate that compost mix, and if you have that in there, then that'll be great. If you don't, you'll need to add it in. But again, we fall back on the moisture. If the moisture content is wrong, then it's not going to break down. Okay, so the next question comes from Rhonda Scott Amrick. It would be nice to have a list of items that shouldn't be composted, i.e. was told don't compost oak leaves, citrus scraps, since they're both too acidic. A good compost will compost both of those ingredients. You haven't got to worry about those. However, there are some things that you shouldn't compost. Now, in my new book, Composting Masterclass, on page 81, we have a load of stuff here that you shouldn't compost, and it tends to be things like animal manures and things like that, like from carnivores, so your cats and your dogs. But we also go into massive lists of what can be composted, and oak leaves and citrus are not a problem. Now, here's the secret. Everybody says, oh, I'm worried it's too acidic, I can't put this in my compost, things like onions, citrus and oak leaves, because it's going to affect my compost. But the microbial action in compost actually makes your compost very close to neutral, or just slightly under it, around about 6.8 on the pH scale. So you haven't really got to worry. As it goes through that composting process, the microbial life is going to balance that pH for you. Okay, so the next question comes from Leslie Eddy, I think it is. I'm sorry if I've butchered your name. Can I put my compost container or pile under a tree? Only place on my property will be in the shade. Haven't set it up, and I'm trying to decide if a worm farm would be better. Well, Leslie, what I would say is, a lot of people decide to put compost bays under trees because it's typically dead space because of the amount of shade that they cast. But there's a couple of things to think about. Yes, you can put that under a tree. However, you really have to manage that water moisture. If you look at a tree, it sends out a good root system, typically about as big as the canopy on the tree. So those roots, they will drain that soil of water. And when that soil underneath the compost bay gets dry, it's going to wick the moisture out of your compost. Now you need to keep your compost at least around about 60% humidity. So if that tree is wicking that moisture out, you're going to have to stay on top of keeping that compost moist. Otherwise, there'll be no problem there in the shade. You don't need the sun or anything for the compost. You can put it there, just be mindful of the moisture content. The next question comes from LJ Kitsan. What is the best method of composting in places where it rains all winter, like in the PNW in the United States? Thanks for this timely subject. Well, LJ, I live in South Wales in the UK, and we are known for having huge amounts of rain. It's quite nice today, and it's one of our drier days. But there are a couple of options you've got. Firstly, when you have your compost, you may see here that I've got a piece of carpet on top of it which holds down a black plastic sheeting. This black plastic sheeting is the key, because not only will it keep the humidity right in the compost, it will actually shed any rainfall off to the edges, and they can then run down the sides of the heap rather than it saturating the heap. But another option available, which I will be doing eventually here and when I build another set of bays over there, is you can erect a roof structure over this with some corrugated tin sheeting on, because that will shed most of the rain for you, and that's what we're looking for. There are obviously compost bays as well that are able to be used that have lids on them, you know, the plastic Dalek style bins. So there's loads of ways that you can compost in a wet environment. Okay, so this next question comes from Alicia Jones, and she has concerns over using cardboard in the compost bin. The process to make cardboard is awful and it has chemicals. So is it really okay, or does it leach? Also, what cardboard can be used, because so many boxes are covered in ink, which I've read can contain heavy metals. So first things first, we have this piece of cardboard. As you can see, it has a plastic coated fronting for the picture to be printed on, and that is no good to your compost. Don't use that. However, this style of cardboard that is like corrugated and it has a couple of sheets on the in and outer side, well, this is really good because it has massive surface area, microbial life can get in there, and it will also break down very easy. Don't worry about the inks on the front of these though, because for the last 10 years, these inks have been plant-based, so you haven't got to worry about them. Yes, after about 10 years ago, they used to be used all sorts of inks and they did contain heavy metals, but not so much over the last 10 years. So if it's cardboard like this with just normal printing on it, then that's great. And if it's like that, leave it out. So this next question comes from Jeannie Hamilton, and Jeannie asks, how can I revive a dead compost heap that has been sitting for 2 years? Jeannie, what I would say about that is that compost is very likely now to be anaerobic. So the best thing you can do with it is turf it all out of the compost bin, and when you're making your next batch of compost, use it as an ingredient. So lay down your brown layer of like wood chips or whatever it is, something like this, lay that down, which will give you a good base, and then start incorporating some greens, and then take some of the ingredients out of the compost that's there now and break that up. You must introduce air into this because at the moment it's anaerobic, which means it's devoid of air. So if we break that up and we incorporate it into a new batch of compost, then you've been able to reinvigorate that compost and it's not been wasted. Too many people throw it away, think it's ruined, but it isn't. All it needs is a bit of air, some moisture, and to be mixed into the right ingredients, and that'll get going again. Okay, and the last question comes from Cecily Walling, and Cecily says, I live in a 3rd floor apartment with a small balcony garden. Is it possible for me to compost? I really want to give it a try with my food waste. This is pretty much all of my outdoor space, and she includes a little photograph of her balcony. And the answer is yes. Anybody can be composting, even if it's at home in your kitchen. Now, what I would suggest for you is to learn what's known as bokashi composting, and I have a whole section in my book on how to do bokashi composting. Now, bokashi composting is a fermentation process, and the great thing about it is there's no smells. It uses what's known as EM1, and it's brilliant because within a few weeks you can have compost that you can literally take out of the bin and put into your potted plants on your balcony and use it. It's a fantastic way. You just have a small little bin or caddy that sits on your compost on your counter in your kitchen, and you put your compost ingredients into it and you cover that with bran. Because it's a fermentation, that bucket needs to be sealed, and it'll come with a lid that will seal down completely. And then you will also get a liquid fertilizer that you can use, or you can put that back in the top of the bin just to keep hydrating rather than using water. And this is a really good thing because you can actually use your kitchen scraps on your balcony. You don't need a big huge bin, so it's perfect for you. What I will say is just be mindful that you're getting 2 of those bins so that you can have one that you can be putting to mature while you start filling a second bin. Well, that's it, folks. I've answered some of the questions that you've put in Brian's group, and I want to thank Brian for giving me the opportunity to answer those on his behalf. And what I would like to say is that if you want to know more information, I've just released a new book today, and this book is called Composting Masterclass. It's by myself, Tony O'Neill, and you can get it pretty much anywhere. Now, it's available in 4 formats. You've got a hardback, you've got a paperback, audio and ebook, so you can get it in pretty much all of the different formats that you want. And I've spent over a year writing this book. It covers all forms of composting, but the important thing about this book is it gets you to understand the whole process and what is happening at each stage of the process. So what I would suggest is that understanding the process allows you to sort out any of these problems when they should arise and what you can do about it. So my book is available in Amazon, and you can get it ordered in any good bookstore. You should be able to get them on any sort of audio or ebook platform. So it's available as of today. Anyway, Brian, I want to thank you very much for allowing me to come on your channel and to speak with your audience. And I hope that they've learned something today and that they have a fantastic day gardening.
That's awesome. Thanks, Tony, so much for answering those questions. We've heard it from the best now. I have a link to Tony's book down in the video description. Like he said, you can get it just about anywhere. Let me know what other questions you have, and if I can answer them, I will. Just leave them down in the comments, or I'll pass them along to Tony. I'll see you guys next time.